A first-class flight attendant deliberately poured scalding coffee on a quiet passenger in economy class. She smirked as the dark liquid stained his worn white shirt. But when she saw his business card hours later, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The man she'd humiliated wasn't just another economy passenger. He was a billionaire CEO conducting an undercover investigation that would expose a shocking truth about America's airline industry. What happened next on Flight 437 would change airline service forever and teach an unforgettable lesson about judging others. This is the story of how one flight attendant's cruel act of discrimination led to the biggest scandal in aviation history. A powerful reminder that sometimes the most expensive coffee in the world isn't the one you drink. It's the one you spill on the wrong person. Before we begin this shocking story about power, prejudice, and justice served at 30,000 feet, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed discrimination on a flight? Don't forget to follow for more true stories that prove karma is real. The mahogany conference table at Airstar Airlines Manhattan headquarters reflected tense faces like a dark mirror. Isaac Marshall, CEO and majority owner, stared at the tablet in his hands, jaw clenched as he replayed the viral video for the third time. "Sir, that incident on Flight 892 has over 2 million views now." Sarah Chen, head of PR, broke the heavy silence. "The passenger claims our crew deliberately ignored his medical emergency because he was in economy." Isaac paused the video, freezing on the image of an elderly man clutching his chest while flight attendants walked past without a glance. The comment section was a firestorm of outrage. This is what happens when airlines treat economy passengers like cattle. Disgraceful. Boycott Airstar. "We've issued our standard response," Sarah continued, her voice carefully measured. "Full refund, compensation package, public apology." "Standard response," Isaac cut in, his voice sharp. "There's nothing standard about watching our crew ignore a man having chest pains, Sarah." The boardroom fell silent. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, morning sunlight glinted off jets taking off from JFK, each one bearing the distinctive Airstar logo he'd designed himself 20 years ago. "The numbers don't lie, Mr. Marshall." James Roberts, VP of Customer Relations, slid a report across the polished table. "Discrimination complaints up 47% this quarter. Service satisfaction in economy class down 35%. Our premium reputation is..." "Premium." Isaac almost laughed. What's premium about treating human beings like they're invisible? He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, a line of passengers snaked through the terminal entrance. Business people, families, elderly couples. All trusting his airline with not just their money, but their dignity. "How many more videos do we need?" he asked quietly. "How many more incidents before we admit there's something fundamentally broken in our service culture?" Sarah cleared her throat. "We're implementing new sensitivity training next month. All crew members will..." "Training won't fix this." Isaac turned back to face his executive team. "We need to understand what's really happening on those planes, not what people report, not what our metrics show. What actually happens when passengers who aren't CEOs or celebrities board our flights." The silence stretched as his meaning sank in. Finally, James spoke. "Sir, are you suggesting..." "Book me on Flight 437 tomorrow, economy class." Isaac's voice was firm. "No special treatment, no security detail, no advance notice to the crew." "Mr. Marshall," Sarah protested, "the risks are nothing compared to the risk of losing our soul as a company." He picked up the tablet again, replaying the video. "I built this airline on a promise that every passenger deserves exceptional service. If we can't keep that promise in economy class, we don't deserve to keep it at all." Back in his penthouse that evening, Isaac stood in his walk-in closet, pushing past rows of bespoke suits. At the very back, he found what he needed: faded jeans from his rare weekend off, a plain white shirt he'd bought for painting the guest room, scuffed loafers that had seen better days. His phone buzzed with concerned messages from the board, his security team, even his ex-wife. This is reckless. At least take an air marshal. You've got nothing to prove. But as he assembled his economy class disguise, Isaac knew he had everything to prove. The airline industry had changed since he'd started Airstar. Premium classes got plusher while economy seats shrank. Service became a luxury rather than a right. Somewhere along the way, treating people with basic dignity had become an upgrade option. In his bathroom mirror, he practiced looking ordinary. No Rolex, no power stance, no executive bearing. Just another middle-aged man flying economy, invisible to the world of privilege he usually inhabited. His new identity was simple: James Parker, middle management, recently laid off, flying to Chicago for a job interview. The kind of man who'd be grateful for any kindness, and all too familiar with its absence. As night fell over Manhattan, Isaac reviewed the flight manifest for tomorrow's Flight 437, a full plane, busy route, veteran crew, the perfect test case for what had gone wrong with his airline, and perhaps with himself. He had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours a cup of coffee would change everything. Isaac Marshall arrived at JFK's Terminal 5 at 5:45 a.m., blending seamlessly into the early morning crowd. No private entrance today, no VIP lounge, no priority anything. Just another economy passenger clutching a crumpled boarding pass for Flight 437. The first test came at check-in. He'd deliberately chosen counter service over digital check-in, wanting to experience every touch point. The agent, Lisa, according to her nameplate, barely glanced up as he approached. "Boarding pass and ID," she droned, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Isaac handed over his carefully prepared documents, the fake ID identifying him as James Parker. Lisa's eyes flicked between his face and the economy class ticket, her expression shifting subtly. "Any specific reason you chose counter check-in, sir?" Her tone suggested he'd personally inconvenienced her. "The kiosks are much faster." "I prefer human interaction," Isaac replied mildly, noting how her lip curled slightly at his worn jacket. "Window or aisle? Whatever's available," she typed aggressively, each keystroke a tiny judgment. 23, C, middle seat, economy. The last word carried a faint sneer. "Board with Group 5. Group 5, the very last boarding group." Isaac accepted the boarding pass with a quiet "thank you," remembering how he'd insisted all passengers deserved equal respect when he'd founded Airstar. Somewhere along the way, that principle had eroded into this subtle disdain served with a plastic smile. Security was another revelation. No priority lane today. He stood in line like everyone else, watching first-class passengers breeze through the express channel he'd used just yesterday. The TSA agent's expression changed visibly when he saw the economy boarding pass, his pat-down notably more thorough than necessary. At gate B23, Isaac found a seat near the boarding area, observing the pre-flight ritual through new eyes. The gate agent's voice dripped with warmth, announcing, "Our Diamond Elite members may board at any time," then turned mechanical for, "Group 5 will be called when space permits." Finally, after watching 4 groups board with decreasing levels of courtesy, the call came. "Group 5, you may now board." Isaac joined the final shuffle of passengers. At the gate podium, he encountered Carla for the first time. The senior flight attendant's perfectly made-up face wore the practiced smile of someone who'd mastered the art of looking through people rather than at them. "Boarding pass," she said flatly, not meeting his eyes. Her scanner beeped. 23C middle seat. She paused, giving him a deliberate once-over. "Are you sure you're on the right flight, sir?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Isaac felt the stares of other passengers, the weight of assumption and prejudice. "Yes," he replied simply. "I'm sure." Carla's smile tightened. "Very well. Down the jet bridge, to the right, all the way back." The emphasis wasn't subtle. As Isaac walked down the jet bridge, he heard her cheerful voice resume behind him. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Robertson. So lovely to see you again." On the plane, the class divide became physical. He walked through first class, where Mark, another flight attendant, was already serving pre-flight champagne. The contrast was immediate and stark, from plush leather seats to cramped economy rows, from attentive service to open disdain. "Excuse me," Isaac said politely as he reached his row. The passengers in the window and aisle seats sighed dramatically before letting him squeeze past. Settled into 23C, he watched the crew's interactions carefully. Carla and Mark moved through the cabin like conductors in a social symphony, their level of attention precisely calibrated to each passenger's perceived status. First class received warm smiles and personal greetings. Business class got professional courtesy. Premium economy warranted basic politeness, but here in the back of regular economy, their masks slipped. When a young mother struggled with her carry-on, Mark walked past without a glance. When an elderly man requested a blanket, Carla's response was curt. "We only stock those for premium cabins." Then came the coffee incident that would change everything. The coffee wasn't just hot, it was scalding. Isaac sat quietly in his economy seat, feeling it burn his skin and soak through his white shirt. What hurt more than the burn was how Carla, the flight attendant, just stood there with that mean little smile on her face. "Could I please have some napkins?" he asked politely, dabbing at his face with his sleeve. His mother had taught him to always be polite, even when others weren't. "Oh dear," Carla said in a sugary, sweet voice that reminded Isaac of his ex-wife's fake dinner party manners. "We seem to be all out. You should be more careful next time." The other passengers on Flight 437 suddenly got very busy reading their magazines or looking out their windows. Funny how people can pretend not to see something happening right in front of them. Up in first class, Isaac could hear the gentle clink of champagne glasses and polite laughter. Two different worlds on one airplane. Mark, another flight attendant, came walking down the aisle like he owned it. He and Carla shared a look that took Isaac back to his high school days, when the popular kids would gang up on someone they'd decided didn't belong. "Is there a problem here?" Mark asked, but the way he said it made it clear he'd already decided who the problem was. "Yes, sir, there is," Isaac answered calmly, just like his father had taught him to do when dealing with difficult people. "I was just—" "Sir," Mark cut him off like Isaac was some troublemaker at a town hall meeting. "I need you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the other passengers." Now Isaac had been speaking barely above a whisper, and he knew it. He'd spent 40 years in business learning to control his voice. This wasn't about volume. This was about power. "I'm speaking very quietly," he said, keeping his tone gentle but firm, like he used to do when his kids were testing him. "I just need some napkins because—" "There he goes again," Carla announced to the whole cabin, like a gossipy neighbor spreading stories over the fence. "Being aggressive. We've had several complaints about you, sir. That's when things started getting ugly. The kind of ugly that makes you wonder what happened to common decency in this country." "I think we need to notify the captain," Mark said, all official-like. "This kind of behavior can't be tolerated." A few passengers started taking out their phones to record what was happening. Isaac noticed how they were careful to start filming only after Carla and Mark had painted him as the bad guy. Funny how stories can get twisted depending on when you start telling them. Captain Mike Davidson came marching down the aisle like a small-town sheriff who'd already made up his mind about guilt. He was tall and imposing in his crisp uniform, but Isaac had seen enough bullies in fancy clothes to know the type. "What seems to be the problem here?" the captain asked, but he was looking at Carla, not Isaac. "This passenger has been increasingly disruptive," Carla said, sounding like she was auditioning for a daytime drama. "He's making threats, refusing to comply with crew instructions." "That's not true," Isaac said quietly. The coffee stains on his shirt were still wet, the proof of who the real victim was. "I've been sitting here quietly." "See what I mean?" Mark jumped in. "Argumentative, confrontational. He's been like this since takeoff." The captain turned to Isaac with all the warmth of a December morning in Maine. "Sir, are you refusing to comply with crew instructions?" "No, Because," Davidson talked right over him, like some folks do when they've got authority and don't care to hear your side, "I have the authority to have you restrained and arrested upon landing." It was like watching a play where everyone had rehearsed their parts except him. In less than 10 minutes, they'd turned a man covered in coffee into public enemy number 1. "I'm not refusing anything," Isaac explained, patient as a Sunday school teacher. "I just asked for napkins after your flight attendant spilled coffee on me." "Spilled?" Carla put on a face of pure innocence that wouldn't have fooled a 5-year-old. "Sir, you knocked the coffee out of my hand with your aggressive gesturing." More phones were recording now. Isaac could already imagine the social media posts. "Unruly passenger causes trouble on flight." The kind of story people share without knowing the whole truth. "That's not what happened," he said, looking around at the other passengers who'd seen everything. But they all suddenly found their shoelaces mighty interesting. It reminded him of how folks used to look away when someone was being treated unfairly at the lunch counter back in the day. "That's enough," Davidson declared, like a judge who'd heard all he needed to hear. He nodded to Mark. "Get the restraints." When Mark came back with the handcuffs, Isaac felt a chill that had nothing to do with the airplane's air conditioning. This wasn't just about coffee anymore. This was about power, plain and simple. "Stand up," Davidson ordered. "I will not," Isaac replied, letting a hint of his real self show through. "This is wrong, and you know it." That's when they grabbed him. Davidson and Mark, using more force than you'd need to wrangle a prize bull at the state fair. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists like tiny metal jaws. "On the floor," Davidson commanded, like he was talking to a dog instead of a grown man. "This is assault," Isaac stated clearly, making sure those phone cameras caught every word. "I'm not resisting, but I want everyone to witness what's happening here. Floor, now." Davidson's grip tightened. "Or we'll put you there ourselves." Slowly, trying to keep what dignity he had left, Isaac lowered himself to the airplane floor. It was dirty down there, covered in crumbs and Lord knows what else. Probably hadn't seen a good vacuum since the plane was built. "Stay there until we land," Carla said sweetly, like she was tucking in a child instead of standing over a handcuffed man. "It's for everyone's safety." The next hour felt like a year. Isaac lay there on that dirty floor, watching feet step over him like he was a piece of luggage someone had left in the aisle. Every now and then, Mark or Carla would walk by, making sure to step extra close, like kids poking at something with a stick to see if it'll move. Once he heard Carla joking with another passenger. "Some people just don't know their place." The way she said it reminded him of things he hadn't heard since the bad old days. Words that decent folks knew better than to say out loud anymore. But Isaac Marshall knew something they didn't. He knew that sometimes the best lessons come from the most humbling moments. And boy, did he have a lesson planned for this crew. When the plane started its descent into Chicago, he allowed himself a small smile. These folks thought they were teaching him about his place in their little kingdom in the sky. Instead, they'd shown him exactly what needed fixing in his airline. All it would take was one business card to turn their world upside down. But for now, he waited, counting the minutes until justice would have its say. Just like his daddy used to tell him, "Son, the sweetest victory is the one your enemy never sees coming until it's too late." The wheels of Flight 437 touched down at O'Hare with a gentle bump. For most passengers, it meant the end of another routine flight. For Isaac Marshall, lying handcuffed on the dirty cabin floor, it marked the beginning of something much bigger. "All passengers, please remain seated until we reach the gate." Captain Davidson's voice crackled over the intercom, all professional courtesy now. Amazing how voices could change when addressing different audiences. Carla's heels clicked past Isaac's head. "Don't worry," she said with that sugary venom. "Security will be here soon to deal with your kind." Isaac watched her feet disappear toward the front of the plane. 20 years of building an airline, and this was what it had become. Well, time to set things right. The plane taxied to the gate like it was just another Thursday morning at O'Hare. Through the small window near his spot on the floor, Isaac could see the familiar Airstar logo on the terminal wall. His logo, designed back when he thought good service meant something to everyone, not just first class. "Chicago police are waiting at the gate," Mark announced, proud as a peacock. "They'll escort our disruptive passenger off first." 2 officers boarded the plane. Young fellows, probably fresh out of the academy, looking like they'd rather be handling a parking dispute than whatever this was. "Officers," Carla stepped forward, smooth as silk. "This passenger became aggressive during the flight. We had to restrain him for everyone's safety." The first officer knelt beside Isaac. "Sir, can you tell us your side?" Before Isaac could answer, Captain Davidson swooped in like a hawk, claiming its territory. "He's been combative the entire flight, started causing trouble right after takeoff." "I'd like to make a phone call first," Isaac said calmly, still lying on that dirty floor like it was his office couch. "Just one quick call." "This isn't a negotiation," Davidson barked, but Isaac was already speaking again. "Call this number," he said to the younger officer, reciting each digit like he was sharing a secret recipe. "Ask for Thomas Wagner, head of Airstar Airline Security. Tell him Isaac Marshall is on the floor of one of his planes." The cabin went quiet as a church on Monday. You could have heard a peanut drop in first class. The young officer, bless his heart, didn't quite catch on yet. He dialed the number like it was just another call. "Yes, hello? This is Officer Chen with Chicago PD. I'm calling about—" "Yes, Isaac Marshall. Handcuffed on—" "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." The color drained from his face faster than a summer sunset. He turned to his partner like he'd seen a ghost. "Remove those cuffs. Now." "But—" Davidson tried to protest. "Captain Davidson," Isaac said quietly, still on the floor but speaking now in his real voice, the one that had built this airline from the ground up. "I believe you're about to have a very bad day." The handcuffs came off with a click that echoed through the silent cabin. Isaac stood slowly, brushing off his coffee-stained shirt like he was dusting off an old family photo. Every eye in that plane was on him now, and nobody was pretending to read magazines anymore. "Mr. Marshall," Officer Chen stammered. "Sir, I am so sorry. We had no idea." Isaac held up a hand, gentle as could be. "You were just doing your job, son. It's these folks," he gestured to his crew, "who need to worry about their jobs." Carla's perfectly made-up face had turned whiter than those clouds outside. Mark looked like he might be sick. And Captain Davidson. Well, he stood there stiff as a board, probably remembering every word he'd said to his boss while his boss was lying handcuffed on that dirty floor. "Everyone except the flight crew, please exit the aircraft," Isaac said, his voice carrying that natural authority that no uniform could match. The passengers couldn't get out of there fast enough, though plenty of them were still filming. This would make quite a story at dinner tonight. When the last passenger had gone, Isaac turned to his crew. They stood there like schoolchildren caught writing on the walls, all that earlier swagger gone with the wind. "Sir," Carla started, her voice shaking like autumn leaves, "I can explain—" "Can you?" Isaac's voice was soft as a summer breeze, but there was steel underneath. "Can you explain why you deliberately poured coffee on a passenger? Why you denied basic service? Why you conspired to have an innocent man handcuffed and humiliated?" "We didn't know," Mark began. "That's exactly the point," Isaac cut in. "You didn't know who I was, so you thought it was okay to treat me like I wasn't even human. Tell me, is that what we've become? Is that what my airline stands for now?" The silence in that cabin was heavier than a Christmas turkey. "Mr. Marshall," Davidson finally spoke up, "as captain, I take full responsibility." "Oh, you certainly will," Isaac agreed. "All of you will. But first, I want to understand. Help me understand when we decided some passengers deserve dignity and others don't." Nobody had an answer for that one. Funny how bullies never can explain themselves when the tables turn. "Effective immediately," Isaac continued. "You're all terminated from your positions with Airstar Airlines, but that's just the beginning. There will be a full investigation, legal action where appropriate, and I promise you, your actions today will follow you wherever you try to work in this industry." Carla burst into tears, mascara running like rain on a window pane. Mark looked like he might faint. Davidson just stood there, rigid as a flagpole, watching his career crash and burn. "Sir," Carla sobbed, "please, I have kids, and I hope you'll teach them better values than you've displayed today," Isaac replied. "Maybe this will be a lesson for them too, about treating people with respect, regardless of their seat assignment." He turned to Officer Chen. "I'll need copies of your body cam footage and incident reports. My legal team will be in touch." The young officer nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." As Isaac walked off his own plane, he noticed how different everything looked from this side of privilege. The terminal, the people, even the air felt changed. Sometimes you have to see the bottom to understand what's wrong at the top. His phone was already buzzing with messages. The video was going viral. The media would be calling soon. His board would want emergency meetings. But for now, he had work to do. Because Isaac Marshall hadn't built Airstar Airlines to be just another company that treated people differently based on the thickness of their wallets. He'd built it to bring dignity back to air travel, and somewhere along the way, that dream had gotten lost at 30,000 feet. Well, time to bring it back down to earth. As he walked through O'Hare that morning, coffee stains still on his shirt and justice on his mind, Isaac remembered something his father used to say. "Son, it's not about how high you can fly. It's about remembering where you came from and making sure nobody gets left on the ground." Today, Airstar Airlines would learn that lesson all over again, and this time it would stick. Isaac Marshall sat in the Airstar Airlines office at O'Hare, his coffee-stained shirt a stark contrast to the polished corporate setting. The terminal manager, Betty Thompson, couldn't stop wringing her hands as she looked at her boss wearing what appeared to be dried coffee and humiliation. "Mr. Marshall, sir, if we'd known—" she began. "That's exactly why you didn't know, Betty," Isaac said gently. "Tell me, how many other passengers have been treated like this? The ones who didn't turn out to be the CEO?" Betty's silence spoke volumes. Through the office window, Isaac could see Carla, Mark, and Captain Davidson sitting in the waiting area, looking like kids outside the principal's office. Their swagger was gone now, replaced by the stark reality of consequences. "Sir," Betty ventured, "I've called an emergency meeting with HR and legal. They're on their way from corporate." "Good." Isaac leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly as his shoulder reminded him of his time on the cabin floor. But first, I want to speak with them one more time. Send Carla in first, please. Carla entered like she was walking to the gallows. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears, her uniform no longer quite so crisp. The smirk that had accompanied the coffee spill was nowhere to be found. "Sit down, Carla," Isaac said, gesturing to the chair. "Let's talk about coffee." She collapsed into the seat, hands twisting in her lap. "Mr. Marshall, please, I can explain." "Can you?" His voice was soft as Sunday morning church bells. "Can you explain why you decided another human being deserved to be scolded and humiliated? I'm genuinely curious." I didn't." She stammered, then stopped, fresh tears welling up. "My kids. This job is all I have." "And that makes it okay to abuse passengers." Isaac leaned forward. "Tell me, Carla, how many others? How many people have you accidentally spilled drinks on? How many have you and your colleagues decided weren't worthy of basic human dignity?" Her silence was answer enough. "You're terminated, effective immediately," Isaac said. "And yes, there will be legal consequences. But more than that, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to have your dignity stripped away, because that's what you've been doing to others." After Carla left, sobbing, Mark came in. The young man's cocky attitude had evaporated like morning dew in August. "Sir," he began, standing at attention like a soldier at inspection. "Sit." Isaac gestured. "Tell me about power, Mark. About how it feels to have it, and how it feels to lose it." Mark sank into the chair. "I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Show me where our protocol calls for handcuffing passengers without cause. Show me where it says to deny water to economy class. Show me where it justifies cruelty." The young man's face crumpled. "I never thought—" "No, you didn't think. You just followed along, didn't you? Easier to be cruel than to stand up for what's right." Last came Captain Davidson, still trying to maintain his authority despite the circumstances. "Mr. Marshall," he said stiffly, "as captain, I take full responsibility." "Yes, you do," Isaac cut in. "You're the captain. You're supposed to be the voice of reason, of safety, of professional judgment. Instead, you became part of a conspiracy to abuse a passenger. Tell me, Mike, how does that fit with your oath as a pilot?" Davidson's professional mask finally cracked. "Sir, my record—" "Your record ends today," Isaac said firmly. 25 years of service, thrown away because you couldn't resist the temptation to bully someone you thought was powerless. By the time HR and legal arrived, Isaac had made his decisions. The terminations were just the beginning. There would be a complete overhaul of training protocols, new oversight measures, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. "But, sir," the HR director protested, "the union contracts—" "Will be honored," Isaac finished. "But make no mistake, this ends now. Every employee, from check-in to cockpit, will understand that their job isn't just about flying planes. It's about treating people with dignity." The media caught wind of the story by evening. Videos of the incident had gone viral, showing the coffee spill, the handcuffing, the humiliation. But they also showed what happened next. A CEO who'd gone undercover to expose discrimination, then acted decisively to end it. In his Manhattan office the next day, Isaac looked out at the morning flights taking off. He'd changed back into one of his usual suits, but he kept the coffee-stained shirt hanging in his office. A reminder. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Other airlines calling to check their own service standards. Civil rights organizations offering support. Morning shows wanting interviews. But Isaac was focused on something else. On his desk lay the new Airstar Airlines mission statement, simple and clear. Every passenger, every seat, every time, dignity is not an upgrade option. As he watched another plane take off into the dawn, Isaac thought about that dirty cabin floor, about power and privilege, about how easy it is to lose your way at 30,000 feet. His assistant poked her head in. "Sir, the board is waiting for your presentation on the new corporate culture initiatives." Isaac smiled, picking up his coffee-stained shirt. "Tell them I'm bringing a visual aid. Sometimes the best lessons leave a mark." He'd built Airstar Airlines once before. Now it was time to rebuild it, this time with a foundation of respect that no amount of altitude could shake. Because sometimes the best view of your company doesn't come from the executive suite. Sometimes it comes from the floor of economy class. Isaac Marshall stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office, watching an Airstar plane lift into the morning sky. 6 months had passed since Flight 437, but the coffee-stained shirt still hung framed on his wall, a reminder of how easily power can corrupt and how quickly dignity can be lost. Things had changed at Airstar. Every flight now carried a plainclothes service evaluator. The old class divides remained. You couldn't erase decades of airline economics overnight, but the human dignity part, that wasn't negotiable anymore. Carla had written him a letter last week. She was working at a small diner now, she said, and for the first time understood what it meant to serve people, not judge them. Mark had enrolled in social work classes. Even Captain Davidson had reached out, offering to speak at crew training sessions about the dangers of authority gone wrong. The coffee incident video had become required viewing at every major airline's training program. The coffee lesson, they called it, a reminder that you never knew who was sitting in 23C. But it wasn't about the CEO in economy class. It was about the grandmother in the back row, the student in the middle seat, the tired businessman by the window. It was about remembering that dignity shouldn't depend on the class of your ticket or the price of your suit. Isaac's assistant knocked softly. "Sir, your flight to Chicago is boarding." He smiled, picking up his briefcase. "Economy class?" "Always, sir," she smiled back. "Though I do wish you'd let us tell the crew who you are these days." "Now where's the fun in that?" Isaac straightened his ordinary tie, checked his ordinary watch. "Besides, the best view of your airline isn't from first class." As he headed for the elevator, he glanced one last time at that coffee-stained shirt. Sometimes the most expensive lessons in life come free of charge. They just happen to be served at 30,000 fee. Thank you for taking time to witness this story with us. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every story we share is meant to move and transform. If you found inspiration in today's tale, simply leave a 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story unfolds.